Police unjustly implicated an 18-year-old black girl. When she flashed her CIA badge, everyone in the court was taken aback. "Don't move! Hands up!" Imani Carter froze in place as the piercing order cut through the night air. She had just been contemplating her future at Howard University as she walked home. She was now facing the police guns, charged with a crime she had not committed. Her heart was racing. She wanted to be honest, explain, and show them her ID. It wouldn't matter, though, based on the expression in their eyes. And things took a turn nobody could have predicted when they discovered the badge, the one bearing the CIA emblem, in her backpack. The system would be rocked by what followed. You won't believe this story, so pay attention. To ensure that you never miss a story like this, remember to hit the subscribe button and enable notifications before we get started. Imani Carter, at 18, was graduating with high honors from Benjamin Banneker's senior year. On a substantial scholarship, she had recently been accepted to Howard University, her ideal university situated in the center of the city she adored. She had planned to celebrate her acceptance with her mother that evening in early April. Consider treating Davina to dinner at a family-friendly restaurant in the area. Imani left school later than normal that fateful afternoon because she had stuck behind for a debate club emergency meeting. Imani always carried a bag full of dense textbooks, physics, mathematics, U.S. government, and a separate pouch that kept her laptop. She rode the number 70 bus, which zigzagged through some of the busiest streets in Northwest D.C. There was a tiny ID badge tucked away in a secret pocket of the pouch. Imani Carter was the name on it, and the CIA's iconic crest was engraved in the corner. Only a few months earlier, she had received the badge as a last-minute preparation before enrolling completely in a longer training program the following summer. The bus travel went well, with only a drowsy group of parents, office workers, and students making their way home. Imani left the area close to Brightwood with the intention of walking the few blocks that remained. As the sun sank below the horizon, the sky turned pinkish-orange, and it was almost evening. There was a big ruckus around the corner at that moment. Imani frequently passed the dilapidated convenience shop on her way home, and 3 police cars were parked in front of it. The alleyway was painted in a strobing, confusing array of colors as their lights flashed in intense reds and blues. Imani's gut knotet. Something didn't feel right. She could see the tension in the officers' poses even from a distance. From where she stood, Imani could not hear the words, but their voices rose in irate cries. She cautiously attempted to avoid the disturbance. However, a voice shouted, "Hey you, halt right there," before she could vanish behind the next block. Uncertain whether the cry was aimed at her, she froze. It was confirmed by a second call. "Hands up, you hoodie-wearing chick." Imani felt her heart pound. There was nothing unusual about her attire. She wore pants, a beat-up black sweatshirt, and a backpack thrown over one shoulder. This was typical Imani dress. Fear still throbbed in her veins. Slowly, she raised her hands, looking around to see if anyone else could step in and help. 2 spectators watched from a distance, using their phones to record the action. 2 policemen came up. They already had their hands in their sidearm grips. She was scowled at by the elder cop, whose name tag was O'Donnell. "Why are you here?" Imani tried to be cool, but her voice trembled. "I'm simply on my way home. A few blocks away is where I live. We're looking for suspects in a robbery that took place earlier today." The younger cop, who was identified as Marston, interrupted. "You fit the description." Imani felt a wave of confusion. How she could fit any description was beyond her comprehension. Many of her classmates and teachers could attest to her whereabouts, because she had spent the entire day in school. Officer O'Donnell angrily said, "But I don't argue. We have 2 options, the easy route or the difficult way." She felt panic gnawing at her chest. Though she recalled her mother's cautions about interacting with the police, Imani wanted to stand up for her rights. Don't waver in your voice. Avoid making rash decisions. Avoid arguing, or they may view you as a danger. She gave a silent nod. Imani's arms were jerked behind her back by Marston, who also applied more forceful restraints to her wrists. O'Donnell quickly searched Imani's backpack as she winced. He searched through her lunchbox, her physics textbook, and her notepad filled with notes from the debate club. He then located and pried open the laptop pack. When he saw Imani's CIA internship badge, his brow furrowed. He held out the tiny ID card as if it were illegal and screamed, "What is this?" Imani's mind was jumbled. According to the confidentiality agreement, she wanted to keep her internship a secret, but at the moment, it was the only thing that could help establish that she wasn't just any suspect. "It's an internship ID from the government," she added quietly. "O'Donnell," the officer snorted. He hissed, "Don't insult our intelligence. This is a phony badge that you printed. Consider yourself shrewd." O'Donnell pocketed the badge and snapped the pouch closed before Imani could reply. He whispered, "We'll check this out at the station." Imani's eyes filled with tears as she was pushed into the rear of a cop car. This was awful, really horrible, she knew. Her mom would be quite anxious. Imani's greatest concern was that she would become just another statistic, another name on a lengthy list of individuals of color who have been wrongfully arrested or injured by the police. No one would be interested enough to run the headlines, but she could already picture them. Robbery charges against a promising honor student. The sound of the officers slamming the door echoed like a judge's gavel in Imani's breast. Telling herself that this was some terrible miscommunication, she tried to breathe and maintain her composure. After they met with her teachers or looked over her school attendance records, it would undoubtedly be fixed. However, Imani saw the future she had imagined as the squad car drove away. The CIA internship, Howard University, and her entire life plan hanging in the balance, ready to fall apart. Hours flew by in a haze of shame and terror. At the precinct, Imani took a seat on a chilly metal bench. Because her wrists were tied behind her back, she attempted to wipe the tears from her face with her shoulder. Officers O'Donnell and Marston came and went, occasionally sneering at her as they passed. At other occasions, they completely ignored her presence and said nothing. Whether they were genuinely looking for proof of her involvement in the claimed heist, or they were just procrastinating, she had no idea what was going on behind that sealed door. Imani held on to the dream that one day they might allow her to get on the phone. She mentally recited her mother's number, 202-555-4937, which she had known since she could speak. In her sleep, she could recite it. At last, an older black woman named Detective Morgan, an officer she had never seen before, came into the holding area. Her eyes flickered with what might have been empathy as she examined Imani. Detective Morgan reached into her pocket for a key and whispered softly, "All right, Miss Carter, let's get you processed." When the cuffs were taken off so that she could be photographed and fingerprinted, Imani let out a small sigh of relief. Everything seemed unreal because of the fluorescent lights above, like though Imani were trapped in a bad dream. She made an effort to speak, but the knot in her throat made it difficult to ask if she may phone her mother. Imani indicated a phone on a nearby desk, suggesting that Detective Morgan could sense her concern. "I'll let you call when we're done here." A lifeline was provided by those few words. Imani blinked back tears as she nodded. She was still aware that several of the officers were observing her. She knew that being young, black, and female was enough to raise suspicion in the minds of too many law enforcement officers. After being fingerprinted, Imani was led to a telephone. Detective Morgan was surreptitiously standing close by, out of earshot. With a pounding heart, Imani dialed home. Davina picked up the phone on the fourth ring. "Hi there, Mom?" When Imani heard her mother's voice, her voice broke. "They took me into custody." She heard the gasp of Davina. "Have you been arrested? What the devil happened? Imani? You're where?" Imani spoke in halting snatches as she explained. "The police, the store, and the unfounded charge." Not angrily, but urgently, Davina interrupted, imploring Imani to keep her cool. "I'm all right," she said. "I'll give Mr. Klein a call." A local attorney with a little practice, Mr. Klein was an old family acquaintance who had previously assisted the Carters with legal issues. Even though the call ended, Imani felt a little better knowing that assistance was on the way. Officers O'Donnell and Marston interrogated Imani throughout the course of the following few hours. They maintained that they had an eyewitness who said that earlier in the day, someone who fit Imani's description had been acting strangely close to the convenience shop. Additionally, they cited her proximity to the location as proof of possible complicity. Imani repeatedly clarified that she was in school when the alleged crime occurred, but her requests were ignored. The cops would scoff or roll their eyes whenever she attempted to point to her flawless attendance record or suggest that her professors might verify her whereabouts. They also made fun of her alleged phony CIA badge. It was like sliding into quicksand, regardless of what Imani said. Each explanation was greeted with incredulity and animosity. Imani was emotionally and physically spent by midnight. Detective Morgan arrived carrying a bottle of water and a tiny packet of crisps. Silently, she gave them to Imani. Imani was appreciative, but she couldn't help but feel that Morgan also thought she was just another adolescent miscreant. Maybe the detective was just being more courteous. Mr. Klein and Davina showed up shortly after. Imani had never been happier to see two people she knew. Davina appeared panicked. Her eyes ringed with the last of her tears, her normally styled hair frizzy at the corners. She hurried over to embrace Imani, but a uniformed officer gently stopped her. Imani smiled distantly at her mother, a narrow, weak smile. Mr. Klein moved to the front. He was a Caucasian man in his middle years, nice and smart. He turned to Imani after introducing himself to Detective Morgan. He muttered, "Don't say anything else without me here." Imani nodded, appreciating the advice. Klein insisted on seeing the proof they possessed against Imani. Officer O'Donnell made ambiguous allusions to the alleged eyewitness. Mr. Klein requested to view the security camera footage from the store. It wouldn't display her at all, so Imani thought the officers were stalling, even though they said it was being evaluated. Imani was eventually taken into official custody, accused with robbery, and given an arraignment date of a few days later. Imani was physically affected by the intensity of that moment. Never in her life had she felt so helpless. Imani sobbed as her mother finally pulled her into her arms. She was aware that she was about to embark on a maze of legal issues that she did not deserve. Detective Morgan apologized as he led Imani to a cell. Imani was put in a holding cell with other adult female detainees, some of whom gave her a quizzical look because she was just a few months older than the other inmates. In a futile attempt to defend herself, Imani fell onto a bench and wrapped her arms around her chest. The CIA emblem was on her mind constantly. Perhaps all of this could be resolved if she could simply confirm her internship status with someone high enough in the organization. Imani, however, also remembered the confidentiality contract she had agreed to. Would the organization even admit she was involved? Would they keep her safe or keep their distance? Imani's stomach churned as she glanced at the peeling paint on the distant wall as the steel door clanged shut. She was concerned about the future she had fought so hard to create, not simply the legal repercussions. A flash of fear passed through her head. If she ended up with a criminal record, maybe Howard would not accept her. Or to avoid negative publicity, the CIA might end her internship. She had a lot of nightmares, and none of them had a happy ending. The night seemed to go on forever. Imani tried to sleep, but every time she fell asleep, she would wake up to the sound of other prisoners shuffling or keys rustling. Imani tried very hard not to cry in front of strangers, but her emotions were fueled by the image of her mother's tearful face floating in her mind. She questioned whether tomorrow would result in the exoneration for which she had prayed so fervently, or if it would merely make the rope around her neck tighter. 2 days later, on her way to the Imani was in the back seat of a sheriff's van with her hands shackled in front of her. Downtown D.C.'s Barrett Prettyman Federal Courthouse. In order to arraign her, she had always found the building itself to be imposing and majestic. She recalled walking past it on field excursions, or while she and her mother were visiting the city. She was coming toward it now, shackled. Imani's mother and Mr. Klein had fought to get her bail set, but the judge at the preliminary hearing didn't seem to be convinced by her claims of innocence, especially since the prosecution, represented by an oddly combative assistant district attorney, argued that Imani was a flight risk because of her dubious government identification. Imani, an 18-year-old who had done nothing wrong, had to spend 2 nights in county prison as a result, which was a terrifying experience. Imani had heard casual remarks regarding O'Donnell and Marston, the 2 arresting officers, during that period. According to several of the elder inmates, These officers had a history of fabricating reports, especially when it came to instances involving young black men and women in Washington, D.C. A fresh form of rage descended upon Imani. She promised to do all within her power to reveal any corruption that could be hiding beneath the surface if she ever managed to escape this disaster. Only the night before, Mr. Klein paid Imani a visit in jail. I asked the convenience store for CCTV footage. Through the security glass, he whispered to her. They say the cameras weren't working, thus the footage isn't available. We will continue to dig. Your alibi must be proven in some other way. Imani swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. She answered, my school records. They'll prove that I attended class. That will be on my next list, Mr. Klein told her. Your attendance log is with me. If we can get them to speak, we have statements from your debate team, teachers, and the bus driver. The prosecution's heavy reliance on an eyewitness narrative is the issue. We'll need to refute it or demonstrate that the witness is lying or misrepresenting the facts. Imani pressed the glass to her forehead. I'm just afraid, she said. But what if that is insufficient? Mr. Klein looked empathetically. We'll exert every effort. Keep going. Imani couldn't help but notice the horde of local media with cameras positioned close to the door as she got closer to the federal courthouse. She heard a deputy make a comment regarding a well-known case that was also on the docket that day, a significant political controversy that received widespread media coverage. Imani sincerely hoped that nobody would be interested enough to film her. Being a media spectacle was the last thing she desired. Along with other prisoners, she was escorted into a sterile hallway to await her time before the court. There was Davina in the gallery. Imani was aware. As soon as they entered the courtroom, Mr. Klein would be at her side. Imani rehearsed the facts in her mind like a debate practice, trying to control her breathing. She visualized bullet points. I spent the entire day at school. I have staff, students, teachers, and witnesses. I should not have been there, according to the store's CCTV. The ID from the CIA internship is authentic. However, she was unable to overlook the terrifying prospect that her CIA affiliation would never be made public. Imani had no method of pressuring the agency to speak up if they chose to ignore her. Unless she was alone, unless the agency made a different decision. That is, Imani's name was finally called. Her heart pounded so loudly she believed everyone could hear it as she was led into the courtroom. She looked around and saw her mother in the front row, her hands clutched in her lap, her eyes puffy from tears but determined. Mr. Klein gave Imani a silently encouraging nod. Imani was asked to come forward with her attorney by the judge, a formidable woman with a severe countenance. An ambitious woman in her late 30s, Ms. Branson, the assistant district attorney, started outlining the accusations. Imani Carter, the defendant, is charged with taking part in an armed robbery at the convenience store located at 3rd and Jefferson. She was located at the location by an eyewitness, and soon after the crime was committed, she was discovered running away. Given the dubious character of the official ID discovered on her person, we asked that the charges proceed and that bail be refused. In Imani's ears, her pulse screamed. Her gut turned when she heard the term armed robbery. In her entire life, she had never held a gun. This was insane. Mr. Klein came forward, his voice firm and determined. This is a serious misunderstanding, Your Honor. My client insists she is innocent. She spent the entire day in school, participating in activities under supervision. We have over a dozen people who are willing to attest to that. Additionally, Ms. Carter's ID is authentic. It can be confirmed that she is enrolled in an official government internship. Ms. Branson looked from Mr. Klein to Imani and arched an eyebrow. Who verified it? The defendant declines to identify the source of this alleged CIA badge. Imani felt her tummy tighten. She had attempted to update the police on her CIA liaison, Ms. Harrington, who was in charge of the High Potential Outreach Program. Imani, however, had been forced to sign papers by Ms. Harrington promising never to disclose program details without first obtaining agency consent. Ms. Harrington's voicemail was all that was left when Imani called her from jail. In the hopes that someone in the agency would intervene, she left one frantic whispered message. The judge lightly struck the block with her gavel. I will admit that this is a unique circumstance. Ms. Carter, however, is only 18, has no past criminal history, and seems to have close ties to this community. If the defense can offer some reliable proof of her identity and internship, I'm inclined to release her on bail. Klein cleared his throat. We would like to take a brief break, Your Honor, in order to collect further proof. The judge gave it some thought. Excellent. We will meet again in 2 days. Until then, unless the defense can produce proof of Ms. Carter's CIA affiliation or a surety bond right away, she will remain in detention. Next case. Imani's eyes were burning as she was let out. Security stopped Davina's attempt to rush forward. Imani's heart sank even more. She was still in a cage, but she was so close to being free. It seemed like a new piece of her future was falling apart every day. Imani was tired as she returned to the holding area, trying to ignore the degrading clangs of the jail cell gate. She put her head in her hands. She needed to figure out how to get a CIA agent to step in. She was concerned that the organization would not want to draw attention to a low-level agent or an intern with little clearance. However, Imani's respite arrived late that night. A security woke her up by informing her that she had a guest. Imani stepped to the visitation room and rubbed her eyes. A woman in a sharp navy suit with her hair pulled back in a tight bun sat behind the plexiglass. The recognition widened Imani's eyes. Her CIA liaison, Ms. Harrington. With haste, Imani slid into the seat and raised the receiver. Ms. Harrington responded in a quiet voice. Imani, I recently learned about it. I apologize for not arriving sooner. Imani touched the glass with her free hand. I'm glad you came. They believe I stole from the shop. They won't accept that my ID is authentic. I'm being accused of armed robbery. Her voice broke. I need your assistance, please. Mrs. Harrington gave a nod. What I can, I will do. This is a sensitive issue. I have been given permission to verify your internship for the judge, but that's all. Although we prefer not to deal with such matters in this manner, your independence is more crucial in the given situation. She stopped and looked at Imani's tired face. It was wrong for you to be arrested in the first place. Imani let out a deep breath, threatening to cry with relief. The plexiglass barrier prevented her from grabbing Ms. Harrington's hand. Thank you, she said in a whisper. Hurry up, please. Imani was notified the next day that Ms. Harrington had submitted an official document attesting to Imani's participation in the CIA's High Potential Outreach Initiative. She even redacted critical parts of Imani's acceptance letter before including it. Mr. Klein requested an emergency hearing with that affidavit. The official documents convinced the judge to grant Imani bail. Imani's mother embraced her so tightly that it left her speechless as soon as she stepped out onto the courthouse steps. A few photos of Imani and her mother were taken by reporters who were scouting the high-profile political case. Imani tried to keep her head down, though. All she wanted to do was return home, get in her own bed, and take a nice shower. Imani knew it was far from finished, though, as she and Davina left. She was required to come back for a full hearing. The following week was set aside for the formal trial. Mr. Klein sat across from Imani and Davina on their shabby couch in the living room that night. On the coffee table was a pile of documents. Mr. Klein smiled wearily as he accepted Davina's offer of a cup of coffee. Klein added a little sugar and said, "Here's the plan. This purported eyewitness and the fact that Imani was close to the store at the time formed the basis of the prosecution's whole case. We'll respond by pointing to Imani's attendance at school, teacher quotes, and the fact that she merely happened to get off the bus close to the business that day. We'll display the sign-out sheet from her argument meeting, the bus route time logs, and everything else. Additionally, we will highlight Ms. Harrington's declaration confirming the authenticity of Imani's CIA internship. It dispels the claim that Imani's identification was fraudulent. However, we must find flaws in their eyewitness account. There is no direct video evidence because the store cameras were supposedly broken. The eyewitness becomes much more crucial as a result. We could undermine the prosecution's case if we can discredit them. Imani's gaze darted between her mother and Mr. Klein as she listened carefully. Davina gave Imani a supportive squeeze on the hand. The idea of enduring a real trial with cross-examination and testimony made Imani's heart race. However, She was aware that it was her only chance to get her name cleared. Her CIA affiliation was just another question that hung over her. She was released on bail thanks to the agency's assistance, but Imani wasn't sure how much more they could do. If at all possible, Ms. Harrington had instructed her to conceal the badge from the press. However, Imani sensed that all would be exposed once she stood trial. She was troubled by the strain of that. Nevertheless, Imani felt a wave of determination. Now, she was fighting for more than just her own liberation. She was standing up for her future and the idea that bias shouldn't have such a strong hold on justice. She was also aware that Marston and O'Donnell needed to answer for their deeds. Imani swore not to overlook it after clearing her name, even though she wasn't sure how to continue on that front. The day of the trial came in a fog of anxiety and expectation. Imani's heart was fluttering like a trapped bird when she woke up that morning. Her mother fussed over her hair, making sure every curl was in its proper position, while she wore a basic navy blouse and black slacks. With the exception of Imani's trembling breathing and Davina's nervous fumbling with the edges of her pocketbook, the entire ride to the courthouse was quiet. Imani saw the same group of reporters outside the courthouse. Some identified Imani as the teenage CIA imposter, a dramatic headline from a newspaper the day before, but they appeared more preoccupied with the ongoing political turmoil. Imani instinctively ducked her head and pushed forward into the structure as flashes went off. They were met in the hallway by Mr. Klein. "Are you ready?" Despite seeing the terror in Imani's eyes, he inquired. She swallowed hard and nodded. The courtroom was somewhat packed as the three of them walked in. Imani caught a glimpse of Miss Harrington, who was quietly sat in the rear. Imani felt a glimmer of comfort from that alone. Everyone stood as the judge walked in. The assistant district attorney, Miss Branson, wasted no time in taking her seat. In her self-assured opening speech, she described Imani as a crafty young lady who had organized a robbery that took several $1,000s from the convenience store's register, lied about her government credentials, and used her youth to avoid suspicion. In order to testify regarding the arrest, she then called Officer O'Donnell. O'Donnell walked onto the witness stand with a sense of righteous outrage. He detailed Imani's unusual loitering near the crime site, her attempted escape, and her production of a phony CIA badge when questioned. Imani's hands clenched in a fist beneath the table as he listened to his testimony. The truth was being flagrantly twisted by the police. He had never once given her an opportunity to explain, she remembered. Ironically, she recalled how composed she had been, attempting to comply in order to prevent things from getting worse. However, O'Donnell's story portrayed her as dishonest and antagonistic. The eyewitness was then called by Miss Branson. Travis Brown, a middle-aged man with a scruffy shirt and a nervous eye shift, walked forward. Imani looked at him. This was a man she had never seen before. According to Brown, who was prompted by Miss Branson, he witnessed Imani run out of the business immediately following the sound of the robbery alarm. Imani felt her heart pound. It was an outright falsehood. She hadn't even entered that store that day. With measured vigor, Mr. Klein cross-examined Brown when it was his turn. "Mr. Brown," he started, "you say you observed Miss Carter, my client, leave the business immediately following the alarm, aren't you?" Brown gave a forceful nod, avoiding eye contact with Imani. "Yes, that is accurate. At that moment, what were you doing in the vicinity?" Brown paused. "I was merely passing. I was working in the car shop down the street, so I went outside for a smoke break." Klein looked at a few documents. "It's Goodwin's Garage, the car shop, right?" Brown gave a nod. "Indeed. Mondays are a closed day." There was a whisper in the gallery. Brown took a deep breath. "Well, that was the day prior to that. I may be jumbling up the days in the timeline." He stumbled. Klein continued. "Therefore, you were not telling the truth when you told the police that you saw Miss Carter on Monday, the day of the heist. Or maybe you didn't even see her." Brown staggered and looked to Miss Branson for support. He received a warning gaze from the assistant DA, but the damage was already done. The fissures in the testimony were visible to all. Klein went on to provide Imani's unquestionable alibi, which included signed testimonials from her professors attesting to her presence throughout the day, remarks from classmates who witnessed her leaving the discussion meeting and getting on the bus. Additionally, A transportation system record attesting to Imani's use of her student pass at a particular time supports her account. Leaning forward, the judge's attention grew. At last, Miss Harrington was summoned to the platform. She confirmed that Imani was a real participant in a CIA outreach initiative. She clarified that Imani's badge was authentic in a cautious yet firm manner. There was a noticeable silence in the courtroom. Miss Harrington gave enough information to disprove the prosecution's allegation that Imani was an imposter, even if she did not disclose the entire extent of Imani's training or the agency's interest in her skills. Imani had a twinge of relief and rage when Miss Harrington stepped off the platform. Painting her as a thief and a liar was the foundation of the entire prosecution. Here, however, was verifiable proof of her honesty. She pondered whether Miss Branson would compromise or push even harder. Miss Branson made a desperate attempt to save the case. It is possible that Miss Carter committed this act even if her CIA internship is legitimate, Your Honor. We got a witness. The judge furrowed her eyes and cleared her throat. An eyewitness whose timeline for being in the area does not correspond with the day the store was open and running, and whose story is rife with contradictions. Do you have any more proof to offer, counsel? Miss Branson's face tensed as she looked at her notes. No, Your Honor. Not right now. The judge glanced at the jurors, then at Imani, and then back at Miss Branson. I don't see any need to press these charges given the defense's strong alibi and the lack of reliable evidence connecting Miss Carter to the heist. The case was dropped. The quiet room resonated with the crack of the gavel. Imani realized she was free a second later and gasped, tears running down her cheeks. Davina cried a sigh of comfort. Reporters in the rear started frantically taking notes and taking pictures. It's over, Mr. Klein whispered as he gave Imani a shoulder embrace. However, until O'Donnell and Marston had to deal with the fallout from their violent and unjustified arrest, Imani didn't think it was really finished. But at least she was free again for the time being. Imani felt both triumphant and angry as she got ready to leave the courtroom. People were swarming about, some taking pictures, others congratulating each other. Imani saw Miss Harrington go in silence, as though she didn't want anyone to notice. She glanced briefly at Imani, who nodded appreciatively. However, the gathering in the corridor suddenly became quiet before Imani could leave. O'Donnell and Marston were standing close to the elevator, talking to Miss Branson in hushed, frantic tones. They had gloomy expressions. Imani's thoughts suddenly turned to the rumor she had overheard while incarcerated. This was not the first time these police had done this. She remembered the whispered tales of them fabricating witnesses or fabricating evidence to get convictions. Mr. Klein patted Imani's arm after observing her intense gaze. He muttered that it might be worth investigating. But first, let's concentrate on your health. Imani gave a nod, but she mentally stored it away. She would never forget. A few reporters surrounded Imani on the courthouse steps, yelling questions. Miss Carter, how does it feel to have your charges dropped? Said one reporter from a local station. Do you actually work for the CIA? Uncertain how to react, Imani blinked. Mr. Klein intervened with a prepared remark. Imani was a young, innocent woman who was wrongly identified. The legal system operated, etc. Imani smiled briefly before letting Davina lead her away. Imani returned home later that day, cuddled up with a mug of tea under a blanket. At least she was in the comfort of her own living room, even if she was emotionally and physically exhausted. Sitting next to her, Davina caressed her shoulder. There was a local news broadcast on television. Imani's case appeared on the screen abruptly. Charges dropped against teen accused of robbery, the headline said. Teia internship verified. The attention caused Imani to wince. However, she experienced a surge of pride. She had been proven right, but the triumph didn't feel complete. Imani thought about what had transpired. The police had singled her out without any justification, disregarded her evidence, and failed to verify any of the information. Why? Was there more to it than just racial profiling? In any case, Imani thought accountability of some kind was necessary. Either an official complaint or even a civil lawsuit was what she wanted to do. She wasn't sure, though, if that was a good idea or if it would expose her to more risks. Ms. Harrington gave Imani a call a few days later. How are you doing, Imani? She inquired. Imani took a swallow. All right, I suppose. Merely attempting to take it all in. I talked to my Langley superiors. They know what's going on. Although the agency typically stays out of local police affairs, we want you to know that you have our backing. If you would like to continue, you are still a part of the High Potential Outreach Program. Imani felt a wave of relief. She had feared that her legal incident would ruin her chances of joining the CIA. I do, she muttered. Not only do I want to keep going, but I also want to... She hesitated, uncertain whether it was appropriate to express her opinions on demanding accountability. Ms. Harrington softly interrupted. Imani, you have every right to pursue justice, but proceed with caution. These local problems can be messy at times. The agency cannot formally support your decision to file a complaint or litigation, but we won't get in your way. Imani was both thankful and frustrated when the call ended. At least the CIA wasn't punishing her for speaking up, but they wouldn't help her either. Imani and her mother sat at the kitchen table that evening and talked with Mr. Klein about their possibilities. In the end, they chose to consider a civil rights lawsuit for mental anguish and unjust arrest, as well as to formally submit a complaint with the DC Police Complaints Board. The media jumped on the topic once more as word leaked out about Imani's ambitions. Seeing an 18-year-old who was also a current CIA in turn join the police force was unique. Imani was portrayed by certain media as a hero and a representation of people who had been harmed by law enforcement. Others questioned her intentions, claiming she was trying to make money out of her experience or causing trouble. Imani tried to block out the conversation, thinking on her impending high school graduation and her impending time at Howard University. However, destiny had more surprises in store. Imani was sitting in Mr. Klein's small office one afternoon while he talked about the case. The telephone rang. After responding and listening for a while, Mr. Klein's eyes grew wide. All right, he responded curtly. There we will be. After hanging up, he gave Imani a stern look. Detective Morgan was that person. She claims it's urgent and wants to see you. A chilly chill went through Imani's body. Why would the detective who handled her arrest want to speak with her at this time? In order to avoid being scrutinized, Detective Morgan dressed simply when he met Imani and Mr. Klein at a modest coffee shop close to the precinct. With caution, she looked around the room before slipping into a booth. She leaned forward once they were seated. She whispered softly, I shouldn't be telling you this. However, I'm sick of seeing innocent people taken advantage of. I know a little bit about O'Donnell and Marston. Mr. Klein and Imani looked at each other. He said, we're listening. Morgan inhaled deeply. They belong to an unofficial group of police officers who, let's say, frequently inflate their arrest totals. They aim for easy marks. Immigrants who are young black people. People are less likely to have the means to defend themselves. For reducing crime, they receive praise and promotions. The person who gave the testimony against you is a paid informant. Every time they need a fast ID to close a case, they use him. Imani felt a wave of sickness wash over her. Is that how they construct cases? Her voice quivered with rage as she asked. Morgan gave a somber nod. Although I have been surreptitiously examining, you are aware of how the Blue Wall operates. Although it's not a clear-cut case, I have enough circumstantial evidence to raise suspicion. We might be able to blow this open if you proceed with your complaint and lawsuit, and if we combine our evidence. However, we will require additional records, statements, and any other information that links these officers to wrongdoing. Mr. Klein gave his chin a contemplative rub. Are you ready to make this information public? Morgan paused. I have to be quite cautious. It might affect my own career. However, I am prepared. I'll do whatever it takes to eventually expose their corruption. Imani's admiration for Morgan grew stronger. At first, she had written her off as another component of the system. But here she was putting herself in danger to act morally. How may I be of assistance? Determined, Imani asked. Morgan gave Imani a level look. The secret is your narrative. In addition to having evidence of a wrongful arrest, your CIA association has generated enough media attention that people will pay attention if you testify. Then there is the issue of Brown's perjury and their falsified proof. We can create a class action lawsuit if we can locate other people who have experienced the same thing and are prepared to testify. Imani's thoughts raced. She imagined the potential size of this. It was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. She recalled how helpless she had felt during her own restless nights in prison. That shouldn't be required of anyone for a crime they didn't commit. That's when she made her choice. "I'm in," she declared. "I want these cops to be held responsible. Come on, let's do it." A flurry of secret meetings and phone conversations ensued. Detective Morgan sent Mr. Klein and Imani lists of possible victims, including the names of individuals she believed O'Donnell and Marston had unjustly singled out. While some had fled the city, others remained in legal limbo, unable to defend themselves due to a lack of resources or expertise. Imani and Davina called these people in the nights and heard terrifying tales of pressured guilty pleas, bogus accusations, and intimidation. Some were reluctant to come forward because they were afraid of reprisals from the police. Others jumped at the opportunity to get their names cleared. As the days stretched into weeks, Imani balanced completing her senior year of high school, getting ready for orientation at Howard University, and organizing a group of people who had been harmed by dishonest police officers. Imani was dubbed the teen whistleblower by the Lock Al media after they learned about it. Although she detested the sensational label, she understood its ability to highlight the reality. Tension was in the air in the city. An internal investigation was started by the D.C. Police Department. Imani was aware that the decision to put O'Donnell and Marston on administrative leave was primarily symbolic. She also got suspicious phone calls at strange times. She was told to dismiss the lawsuit by whispered threats or heavy breathing without caller ID. She told Mr. Klein about every occurrence, and he advised her to exercise caution. Detective Morgan thought it might be O'Donnell and Marston's associates attempting to scare Imani. Imani's mental health was affected by all of this. Most nights, she woke up sweating and having dreams about the time she was jailed. She occasionally had dreams of entering the convenience shop, only to be cornered by O'Donnell. Imani would cry out for assistance in these dreams, but her voice would disappear. She tried to push it away every morning, telling herself that she was fighting back and that she was secure now. However, some traumas persisted like ghosts and would not go away with just willpower. Imani held fast to her mother's affection, Miss Harrington's circumspect assistance, and her unshakable belief in her own sense of fairness throughout it all. In her bedroom, she would occasionally find comfort by working on code-breaking problems from her CIA training or journaling about everything that had transpired. She writes on the strange experience of being a civil rights activist and a young CIA intern. She described her classmates as being both cautious and in awe of her. Since they had seen her at school, the most of them accepted her story. However, Imani could sense that some people felt uneasy about the focus. Imani crossed the stage amid applause from her peers and a standing ovation from the faculty on the day she was officially graduated from Benjamin Banneker Academic High School. With tears in her eyes and quivering hands, she accepted her diploma. Even though this was the result of years of arduous work, she had the feeling that her true struggle was only getting started. Imani filed a legal claim against Officers O'Donnell, Marston, and the D.C. in late June. The first significant hearing for the police department was held. The city had submitted a motion to dismiss, arguing that Imani's claims lacked evidence. However, Imani and Mr. Klein arrived with concrete evidence linking the officers to serial misbehavior, insider testimony from Detective Morgan, and testimonies from other victims. The courthouse where Imani had previously been charged was the venue for the hearing. Imani, dressed in black trousers and a white shirt, strode those hallways with a proud demeanor. Her mother walked next to her, exuding a calm resolve. Mr. Klein looked confident as he carried a heavy briefcase. For the first time since her trial, Imani saw O'Donnell and Marston inside the courtroom. They gave her an unmasked, hostile gaze. Their legal representative, a well-dressed lawyer Imani knew from high-profile cases defending police officers against allegations of misbehavior, accompanied them. It was thick enough to taste the stress. In her testimony, Detective Morgan described how she witnessed the dubious arrests of O'Donnell and Marston, including Imani. She explained the hired informant, the pattern of behavior, and the push to use all measures required to clean up the streets. Imani then took the stand and detailed her experience, including how she was detained without reason, how her appeals were disregarded, and how her valid identification was rejected as fraudulent. Imani also talked about her internship with the CIA, explaining that although she couldn't reveal everything, her participation in that program was genuine and further evidence that the officers hadn't tried to confirm her identity. Mr. Klein produced statements from 6 people who had been falsely accused while O'Donnell and Marston were in charge. Every report repeated Imani's deception, threats, and tenuous proof. Together, they presented a scathing picture of widespread wrongdoing. Imani was cross-examined by the officer's lawyer, who tried to portray her as a nuisance who was supporting a media circus. Imani gently replied that her only goal was to clear her name and save other people from experiencing the same injustices. Some of the gallery's viewers nodded in agreement with her poise when questioned. The judge's decision to reject the city's move to dismiss, finding strong evidence that called for a full trial, was the turning point. The faces of O'Donnell and Marston grew serious. A sense of relief washed over Imani. This indicated that she had overcome the first line of defense and that her case would proceed. Justice was drawing nearer. Settlement negotiations took place behind closed doors over the next few weeks. In response to growing public criticism, the city offered Imani and the other plaintiffs a financial settlement in exchange for reforms. The group and Imani were divided. They required a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and significant policy adjustments. Money wouldn't be enough. Around this time, a grassroots organization against police corruption wanted to commemorate Imani for her bravery, and she unexpectedly received an invitation to a modest ceremony at the local community center. She hesitated, not wanting to draw further attention to herself. However, Davina urged her to travel, stating that many people were given hope by Imani's narrative. Imani found herself on a small platform in front of a few dozen neighbors, relatives, and community leaders on the night of the event. She noticed that several people who had experienced their own encounters with dishonest law enforcement had tears in their eyes. Imani trembled as she spoke over the microphone. "I'm only 18. I never wanted to be in this situation, but sometimes you have to stand up when the system tries to break you. I am appreciative of everyone who has fought beside me." Even though the ovation was loud, Imani's gaze was fixed on Ms. Harrington, who had crept in covertly. She gave Imani a subtly respectful nod. Imani grinned with joy. As summer drew to a close, Imani juggled finishing out the lawsuit specifics, continuing her CIA courses, and getting ready for Howard University's orientation. There were rumors that O'Donnell and Marston were being investigated internally for a number of misdeeds, and that criminal charges might soon follow. August, almost a year after Imani's tragic arrest, was the turning point. The fabricated eyewitness who had testified against Imani, Travis Brown, unexpectedly consented to a plea agreement with the district attorney's office in exchange for testifying against O'Donnell and Marston. Brown revealed the cops' plan and acknowledged that he had been bribed to accuse Imani and others. The only option available to the city was to abandon its defense of the policeman. Days later, O'Donnell and Marston were taken into custody on several counts of perjury, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Local headlines exploded with the news. After a teenage whistleblower reveals lies, corrupt police officers are charged. Imani experienced a mixture of joy and sorrow. Although she didn't enjoy witnessing people's lives destroyed, justice required responsibility. O'Donnell and Marston's trial that followed was quick and devastating. The jury found both cops guilty based on reams of evidence, Detective Morgan's investigation, and Brown's testimony. Their badges were taken away, and they received prison sentences. Imani shed a few tears of relief as she watched the verdict on television. She recalled how helpless she felt the day those 2 men had shackled her. They would now have to deal with the repercussions of their conduct since the roles had been reversed. Following this, the city reached a settlement in the civil case, providing a sizable amount to all of the plaintiffs who had joined, not only Imani. More significantly, the settlement contained mandatory racial bias training, stronger control on the use of informants, enhanced accountability procedures, and legally binding commitments for police reform efforts. In a press conference, the mayor referred to Imani's experience as a catalyst for meaningful change. It wasn't political rhetoric, Imani hoped. The settlement's financial component was substantial for Imani, enabling her to assist her mother with past due expenses and attend college debt-free. Imani, however, believed that her greatest triumph was intangible. Justice was done. She had defended a town that was in danger of being overrun by those sworn to serve and protect it, in addition to herself. Imani, meantime, readied herself for a new phase of her life. She had been accepted to Howard University and was prepared to return to her CIA internship in a more formal role. As she packed her things in the final days of summer, she reflected on the turbulent years she had experienced. Her tenacity, fortitude, and belief in justice had all been put to the test. She had come out stronger and more resolved than ever to make the most of her gifts. Imani initially walked across the Howard University campus as a registered student in late August. The antique structures and the bustling crowd of students entering were illuminated by the bright sun. Being a part of this prestigious university, which had produced numerous civil rights leaders and bright brains, gave Imani a rush of pride. She located her dorm, introduced herself to Shanice, her roommate, a sociology major who had seen Imani on the news but had remained calm, and began unpacking. Imani sneaked out for a stroll around campus that evening, when the quad was covered in long shadows from the early darkness. Breathing in the balmy, honeysuckle-scented air, she stopped close to the library. She felt calm for the first time in what seemed like forever. Her cell rang. Miss Harrington was the one. Imani grinned in response. Imani said, "I was just thinking about you." There was pride in Miss Harrington's voice. "I wanted to offer you my congratulations. It's a major step to start college." Imani remembered all the CIA insignia in her wallet represented as she glanced down at it. She said, "I still can't believe how far I've come. I feared going to jail for a crime I didn't commit a few months ago. I currently intern at the CIA while I'm a freshman at Howard. It's unbelievable. Life can be unpredictable at times," Miss Harrington added. "You were remarkably graceful in handling yours. You are a welcome addition to the agency. Imani, you have a promising future." Imani put her phone back in her pocket and ended the conversation. She remembered how the unfairness had weighed heavily on her chest on the hectic day of her detention. And then she recalled that last day in court, that collective gasp when she broke the fake narrative by flashing her actual CIA badge. A feeling of warm pride filled her. Justice and freedom had been achieved by her. Imani felt a fresh sense of purpose growing inside her under the wide night sky. Even though she was still young and developing, she had demonstrated that one voice, even one as modest and unassuming as that of an adolescent girl, could challenge an established order and lead to significant change. People had come together to support her, and they had paved the way for the truth. Imani's lessons would begin tomorrow. She would soon return to her CIA training modules, perhaps even working on a specialized project that might make use of Imani's analytical prowess, as Miss Harrington had suggested. She welcomed the unknowns that awaited her on the voyage ahead. She had a second opportunity, a better foundation, and the unflinching understanding that even the strongest walls can be knocked down with perseverance, allies, and a belief in what's right. Once an 18-year-old who was falsely accused, Imani Carter has emerged from the shadows of injustice and entered the bright future. She was aware that the seed of significant change was planted in that light, not only for herself, but also for all those who had ever been instructed to keep quiet about wrongdoing. When the judge struck the gavel, the courtroom went silent. The case was dropped. Imani let out a loud sigh, not believing what she was hearing. She had persevered, she had struggled, and finally she had triumphed. Justice was being served to the policeman who attempted to destroy her life, and the system that had let her down was at last coming to light. She felt the burden of it all subside as she stepped outside. She was no longer the only focus of this. It concerned all those who had been silenced, all the names that were never given another opportunity. However, this is only the start, because a single voice motivates 100 others to stand up. What are your thoughts? Did justice really get done? Tell me in the comments below. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and enable notifications if you enjoy stories like this one, so you don't miss the next inspiring one. See you at the following one.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.